when it comes to China, I reckon that they'd accumulated roughly 20,000 tons between 1983 and that year, 2002. Now, since then, of course, the Chinese government has continued to accumulate gold. Not only that, but mine output is the thick end of 10,000 tons. I mean, China invested hugely in its own gold mine production and rapidly became the largest producer nation by far, eclipsing South Africa, which was declining quite rapidly as it happened back in the, I suppose, sort of 1990s and into the early noughties. And the other thing, of course, is that state-owned refiners were bringing in doré from abroad. I mean, particularly, obviously, Mongolia, and paying them for the doré. And where did the gold go? Well, I think your friend who took his profits $1,000 below this, you'll probably power back in over 20,000 sometime. I don't know. That's what tends to happen. I mean, I speak as as a stockbroker of some decades, knowing the human behavior, if you like, of investors and speculators and so on and so forth. And there is absolutely no doubt. I mean, the sensible advice to an investor is when you've got a nice profit like that, book some of it and just run the rest for free. As for overbought, no, it's not. If you just look at the open interest on COMEX, there's no way it's overbought. I mean, the amazing thing is that most of this rise, both in gold and silver, has been on the back of a bear squeeze, not, enthusiastic buyers rushing in and buying it. And there's a complete misunderstanding, actually, about what gold is about. I mean, there are enough gold bugs running around saying, oh, it's going to the moon, or it's going to do this, going to do that. But actually, do they really know what they're talking about? I mean, they tend to look at charts, let's face it. And they've also got this thing in their brains about, government is wicked and therefore gold is good. It's not good enough, actually. You've got to really understand what the game is about. The point is that, I mean, it goes back all the way to Roman times. They decided the difference between final settlement and deferred settlement was final settlement was settlement in something without counterparty risk.
Gold's role stretches back millennia. The Romans established metallic standards to settle core obligations in bronze and later precious metals so that the means of settlement couldn't be reversed by default or weakened by counterparty failure. Modern fiat currency systems, however, rest purely on trust. Central bank policies, fiscal balance, debt, inflation all affect that trust. When confidence in currency weakens, gold tends to rise. Since the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, the world has been largely on fiat money. Many analysts argue we are now at or approaching a tipping point whereby that trust is eroded enough to magnify gold gains further.
And that was metallic. And, when they produced the first Roman laws were dated in 448 BC, they said, settlement is metallic. In those days, it was a pound of bronze, basically. That was the unit called the ice. And gold came later, of course, because it's a lot more convenient and so on. And it was also being discovered a bit more. So, there was a little bit of quantity there. So it could be used for the temporary storage of one's labor, if you want to really sort of go back to classical economics. But otherwise, everything else is deferred settlement. It's a promise. It's a promise to pay. You might think that you're paying a workman for painting the outside of your house. And, okay, fine, you've paid him. But there's not final settlement, because what you've done is you've done a probably cash, in which case it's the counterparty risk is actually with the central bank, or alternatively, by bank transfer. In other words, you've just transferred one form of deferred settlement for another. Nobody does final settlement nowadays. But when you get a loss of confidence in the value of the currency, which is the top level of credit, if you like, in any economy, then that loss of confidence is reflected in a falling value for the currency. And that is exactly what's going on. So the idea that gold is overbought, oversold is rubbish. It's got nothing to do with it. Really what we're looking at is the relationship between gold and fiat currencies, which depend entirely on faith. And it's as simple as that.
China's state strategy toward gold reserves offers a masterclass in long-term accumulation. Starting in the 1980s, state institutions were tasked with building gold and silver stockpiles. For years, private gold ownership was restricted. Only in 2002 did the state open gold delivery mechanisms via the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Since then, China has vastly expanded mine output, invested in refining, imported gold doré, and encouraged domestic gold accumulation via savings plans. Meanwhile, secrecy remains a hallmark. How much gold is held, where by whom, remains partly opaque. But what is known reinforces that China is cornering a large share of above-ground gold.
So, well, where are we? I mean, I think we can really say that gold over millennia, basically, its purchasing power varies very, very little, and there's ample evidence of that. But when it comes to fiat currencies, they come and go. They don't last terribly long, is a short answer. I mean, the dollar has really been a fiat currency for some considerable time. I would say since 1933, if you like. Just before, they devalued it from 20.67 to $35 an ounce. But more specifically and more obviously, since the Bretton Woods agreement ceased, was suspended actually, in 1971. So we've had 54 years of pure fiat currency. But the destruction process actually started earlier than that. So we just bear that in mind. I think really what gold is telling us is that we're coming to the end of that era. And, anyone who's left holding the fiat baby is, basically has had it. That's what's going to happen. So that, I think, is the background. But the interesting thing is that the Chinese, who are a bit old-fashioned over these things, they didn't have the benefit of John Maynard Keynes teaching them economics, etc. They came out of communism, if you like, with the belief that the capitalist system would fail. And of course, the failure of the capitalist system, would be through its currency. And so they started accumulating gold, really, shortly after Mao Zedong passed away. And I've got an English copy of the regulations dated 1983, appointing the People's Bank of China with the sole responsibility for managing and acquiring the nation's gold and silver reserves. And this is terribly important. It's important to know this.
Globally, gold supply has crept up largely through mine production, while recycling has declined or stagnated. Demand is being pushed higher by multiple forces: retail investors seeking safe haven, institutional inflows via ETFs, and state actors accumulating reserves. Liquidity is thin in certain segments of the market. When large portfolios shift even slightly into gold, matching supply becomes challenging. This mismatch fuels sharp movements. Silver behaves similarly, but with added industrial demand and greater volatility. Recent data shows major ETF inflows, rising central bank purchases, and retail demand surging in Asia, balancing weaker performance elsewhere.
The second thing to know is that no one in China was allowed to own gold until it was legalized in 2002. And that was the point where the Shanghai Gold Exchange opened, which facilitated the delivery of gold to the public. So we had this period between 1983 and 2000 when the China state acquired gold. And so where did it come from? Well, we had a massive bear market between those dates. And not only that, but, it was quite clear that quite a lot of central bank gold held in the West had actually gone out on lease, never to be returned. This was estimated by Frank Venerosa to be somewhere between 10 and 14,000 tons. In other words, between a third and a half of all central bank gold was out on lease, sold into the market, and not coming back. Now, Venerosa reckoned that it was probably adorning the necks of Asian women. I think it's another story. I think the People's Bank of China was in there quietly picking it up. I estimate, now I have no firm figures on this at all, and I have to say that the thing about the gold market, as we all should know, is that nobody wants to say that they actually own any gold. They want to keep it secret. And I'm not talking about individuals, I'm also talking about governments. And this is the whole thing. I mean, the US government is a prime example. I mean, we keep on wondering how much gold they've actually got. And what do they say? Nothing. So when it comes to China, I reckon that they'd accumulated roughly 20,000 tons between 1983 and that year, 2002. Now, since then, of course, the Chinese government has continued to accumulate gold. Not only that, but mine output is the thick end of 10,000 tons. I mean, China invested hugely in its own gold mine production and rapidly became the largest producer nation by far, eclipsing South Africa, which was declining quite rapidly as it happened back in the, I suppose, sort of 1990s and into the early noughties. And the other thing, of course, is that state-owned refiners were bringing in doré from abroad. I mean, particularly, obviously, Mongolia, and paying them for the doré. And where did the gold go?
Recent reports show gold has surged dramatically in 2025, reaching record highs above $4,000 per ounce. ETFs have drawn large inflows, especially in first half of 2025, after years of relative weakness. Central bank buying continues at elevated levels, with many forecasters, J.P. Morgan, analysts across finance, projecting prices averaging $3,600 to $4,000 plus through late 2025 and into 2026. While there is talk of corrections, many believe we are witnessing a structural bull market, not just short-term speculation.
Didn't leave China. I mean, as far as the relationship between gold and China is that China is Hotel California. It comes in, that's no problem at all, but it can't get out. So that has been the policy. Why is it this policy? It's this policy because the Chinese understand the importance of gold. Now, since the SGE opened, over 27,000 tons of gold has been delivered into private hands. Now, some of that would have returned into the Baltic system as scrap. But I don't care, because that just gets redistributed elsewhere. It's not going out of China. Never has done.
No.
And on top of that, of course, you've got the banks. The banks run gold accumulation plans for their depositors. And this gold is not delivered out of the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It is stored within the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So we don't know how much gold there is there. But I should think it's quite a lot. I pencil in a figure about 10,000 tons. Now, I think that might underestimate the situation for the very simple reason that household savings rate is in the order of, it's over 30%. And that's the equivalent of $5 trillion a year. Now, it used to go into off-plan apartment buildings and stuff. That's gone. Let's forget that. Stock market, maybe a little bit, but I think that's got very, very limited appeal. I mean, really, and then the other thing you've seen, I mean, mostly it's been accumulating as as deposits on the bank's bank accounts, deposit accounts. But for the last year or two, the People's Bank has been reducing its sort of main interest rates, and the banks with it. And so, what does the housewife do? Well, the answer is that she opens a gold accumulation plan, which she can do for as little as 500 yuan. So that's, which is less than $100. So, this is actually very important. If you take this all together, we are, in my estimation, looking at a figure like 75,000 tons out of a total of a bit less than 200,000 tons of above ground gold stocks.
Yeah.
China has cornered the gold market. That's what it boils down to. Because it's not just China. You've got India, which has got massive amounts of bullion held in the form of jewelry. I mean, most of the Chinese public gold is actually jewelry as well. And you've also got Russia. Now, I understand on pretty good authority that Russia's got 2 sovereign wealth funds, which have a total of about 10,000 tons of gold between them.
Gold isn't without its downsides. High prices hurt jewelry demand, and when interest rates rise or real yields become more attractive, gold's appeal can weaken. Market sentiment shifts are rapid. Liquidity constraints, while amplifiers, can also exaggerate downside. For investors, booking some profit when gains are large is prudent, while maintaining exposure may capture potential upside. Understand what you own, physical versus paper gold, ETFs, bullion, reserves. Given recent global uncertainty, gold's role as insurance in portfolios is growing. Those who opt out now risk missing what could be one of the sharpest squeezes in modern gold market history.
And then you've got the Russian Central Bank, which has got a further, 2.3 thousand tons, whatever. You've also got the whole of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, all their central banks. Presumably they've got sovereign wealth funds as well. Now, all this is meaning that the liquidity we have here is minimal. Now, let's look at the demand side. So far, this hasn't mattered because nobody wants to buy gold. I mean, any investment manager isn't going to earn fees by putting his punters into gold. He would rather put them into something which is going to pay him a bit more. And not only that, but the regulators are on his side. The regulators turn around and say that physical metals are not regulated investments. Well, of course, this was why they said they set up ETFs, to get around this regulatory hurdle. But the ETFs are beginning to grow. People are beginning to buy into them slowly. But the other thing, which I think is very important on the demand side, is that we now see analysts at the major US banks turning around and saying, we believe gold's going at 4,000, whatever their reasons. I don't care. I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. I reckon that's my default assumption anyway. But, the fact that they are saying it, and the fact that the investment managers within those banks, who are typically managing or responsible for over $1 trillion, we're looking at banks like Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citibank, Citicorp, whatever they call themselves now, etc. We're talking about huge numbers. They haven't got any. I don't think they necessarily know how to get it, actually. I mean, so that, this is interesting. When you look at the complete investment management universe around the world, it is estimated that portfolios are worth some $300 trillion. $300 trillion. Now, gold ownership of that, you just look at ETFs and maybe sort of make a few assumptions about, bullion being stored and so on. But, basically it's ETFs and nothing else. It's less than 0.5% of that. I mean, it really is. Less than 0.5% is in gold. And yet you've got these behemoths in America now thinking, oh, we better buy some of this. Now, to put it into context, my China story suggests that the amount of liquidity which is unspoken for, including jewelry in the West, is probably in the region of about 40 to 45,000 tons. That's all. That's it. We can see what's in the vaults. We can't see what's in the Swiss vaults. That's something I don't know. I would, someone gives me a number, it'd be super. But I think quite sensibly the Swiss don't produce these numbers. That's what I would assume anyway. But it does mean that if a 1% increase in allocation, portfolio allocation of that 300 trillion was to take place at current prices, you're looking at 25,000 tons. Where's it going to come from? I mean, the answer basically is that we're heading for the most enormous crisis in the gold market. And the figures are very different for silver because being an industrial metal, etc., but the same principle applies. The liquidity is just simply not there, which is why it's sort of hurdling up $1 at a time at the moment. This is a squeeze on the system. And, this is very serious. And I think so, I can understand your punter selling off, $1,000 below the current level and maybe living to regret it. But, I can understand that. But the bit he's missing basically is he's going to be out of the market on the biggest, sharpest squeeze probably seen in history. I think that's where we're heading.